You're listening to the Lord's Army Radio Dispatch. The Lord's Army Radio Dispatch is the audio branch of lordsarmy.org, a Christian training ministry. During this weekly podcast, you'll meet individuals on the front lines of battle with the world. You'll meet Christian leaders, pastors, and lay people, all of whom have been used to the glory of God. If you are a Christian, then we encourage you to become an active duty soldier and join the battle that's going on around you every single day. Come join the Lord's Army. Thank you for listening. This is the 40th episode of the Lord's Army Radio Dispatch and the first episode of the new format. For the new format, we're highlighting individuals, those of you who are actively living out the Christian faith, fighting the good fight. These are the people we're talking with because these are the people that are going and doing exactly what you are capable of doing. God created you for His glory, and our prayer is that by highlighting these individuals, the Lord will inspire you to take action wherever you are now. For our first of these conversations, we're talking with Dr. Derek Thomas. I first heard Dr. Thomas from a lecture he did at RTS, Reformed Theological Seminary. He's the author of several books, a commentary, a fellow of Ligonier Ministries, a professor at RTS, the senior pastor of First Pres in Columbia, South Carolina, or, as Dr. Thomas refers to it,
I teach the science of living blessedly forever, which is Perkins's line. And that makes you sound as if you're from the west coast of California somewhere.
Right. That Perkins that Dr. Thomas refers to is William Perkins. William Perkins was a 16th century Puritan, the one who mapped out a very large visual catechism, an eye chart of sorts that beautifully displays the Ordo Salutis, sometimes called the Golden Chain. If you had been a Puritan child growing up in that time, it's likely this chart would have been on the wall of your nursery. I love that definition of theology, the science of living blessedly forever. I love it not only because it does indeed sound like something some hippy-dippy West Coast guru might say. I like it mostly because it's true. That's exactly what theology is. True, right theology means everything to us, not just as Christians, but as humans.
Yes, that marvelous opening sentence of the Institutes, that nearly all the wisdom that we possess, true and sound wisdom, consists in knowing God and in knowing ourselves. And we cannot know God without asking questions about what is He like. Even at the most simple level, that God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable in His being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. I mean, that's a theological statement in itself.
Everything is driven by theology, and it's not just reserved for people like Dr. Thomas. You are a theologian.
Well, R.C. Sproul has a book called Everyone's a Theologian. Mm-hmm. And the question is, are you going to be a good theologian or a bad theologian?
Right.
Everybody has a view about God, whether He exists or not, and if He does, what is He like? But for Christians, for Bible-believing Christians, it's just silly and folly to suggest that you don't need theology. You can't read a sentence in the New Testament or in the Old Testament without necessitating some kind of theological construct. John's prologue, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So you've already got a conundrum. There's only one God, and yet there is more than one who is that one God.
Right.
You're into the realm of theology. You can't understand the cross. I mean, think about crucifixion. If you had witnessed the crucifixion as a Roman citizen, what would you have inferred? You would have inferred that this man was receiving the death penalty because he had violated Roman law.
Right.
If you if you were a Jew, you would have looked at the crucifixion and said, this man is a blasphemer, and he's being punished by God. But simply looking at the cross and viewing it doesn't say substitution. It doesn't say satisfying the demands of divine justice. That's theology. And so it took the Apostle Paul to make the crucifixion theologically understandable.
Right.
Take the simple question: who is Jesus? Jesus is both God and man, and how can that be? And it took the church almost 400 years to answer the question: how can he be both God and man at the same time? And what does that mean, and what does that not mean? And so in Chalcedon, in 451, you have the church's response, theological response to the question, who is Jesus? So everybody's a theologian, and you can't avoid that. Now, typically when people say, I can't be bothered with theology, they're saying a number of things. Sometimes they mean, I just don't like to read.
Right.
And it's sad and lamentable just how poorly many Christians give themselves to reading. And not just reading the Bible, but reading books that explain the Bible, and reading books that will grow them intellectually and spiritually. Paul makes the point that truth is in order to godliness. Mm-hmm. And that works both ways, that that the purpose and function of truth, and therefore the purpose and function of theology, is to make you godly. And in one sense, you cannot be godly without that godliness affecting your mind.
Right.
Because your mind matters, I think Psalm 32.
So, okay, if everyone is a theologian and theology is so important, then why don't people spend more time reading about theology?
Sometimes the issue is laziness. Sometimes the issue might be intimidation. They're intimidated by certain books, and so I think it's important for us to put the right kind of book into people's hands. It always amazes me that people who are lawyers and doctors are intimidated by books on theology. And that makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. They read stuff that is almost illegible. If you've ever read legalese language, or a medical textbook.
Right.
But are intimidated by Christian books. And books have been sort of mainstays for me throughout my life, and I can sort of mark certain times when a particular doctrine became clearer to me because I read that book at that time. And books that I've gone back and reread. There aren't many books that you read more than once, but there are some books that you read often.
Right.
Pilgrim's Progress is one that I try to read every year.
We'll get back to Pilgrim's Progress in a moment. But first, let's talk about a man named Friedrich Schleiermacher. In 1799, Schleiermacher published a book entitled On Religion. This book was a bombshell in its day. It's the reason why Schleiermacher is often called and remembered as the father of modern liberal theology. His argument, to put it simply, was that Christianity is less about facts and information and more about feelings. Schleiermacher ultimately rejected nearly everything about Orthodox historical biblical Christianity and argued that we should rely more on, well, whatever we feel is true.
I think that, the ghost of Schleiermacher at the end of the 19th century still resonates. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but he more or less said that religion consists largely in experience, and the fact of the matter is that God gave us a Bible. He gave us a written book with words and verbs and nouns and adjectives and sentences, and it behooves us, therefore, as Christians, to understand. So I think that the purpose and function of the church and of teaching elders is to make the truth known, to explain and apply the scriptures, and therefore teaching robust doctrine in a form that people can understand, and churches are different, and some churches are well taught and others not so much, and therefore you need to know your audience. You need to know where they are in order to take them a little further.
Sure.
But you listen to preaching, and you listen to Sunday school lessons, and you encourage Christians to read, and every church should have a little book table, if not a bookstore. They should certainly have a book table. And I'm amazed just how books on theology, on particular topics, have helped people in moments of their lives in an understanding.
While we're on this topic of how helpful books can be, allow me to take a moment and promo our new book that's coming out this September. In print and ebook this September, we're releasing a new book, Lord's Army Basic Training, a survival guide to the Christian faith. This book covers the essentials of the faith: basic theology, experimental theology, and an overview of church history. It's really designed for personal growth or as part of a group study. It's a short read, but covers a wide variety of topics. If you'd like to be a part of the launch team and receive a free copy, just email us at info@lordsarmy.org. That's info@lordsarmy.org. Okay, back to how helpful books can be. The reality is that there is a God, and He's why we're here. He has conveyed certain truths to us through His inspired word. To dismiss or deny these things is idolatry. Moreover, any departure from these truths is to believe something that is untrue, and that has very real consequences. That's where books come in. Books allow us to interact and interpret truths in a way that virtually no other medium allows. Take Pilgrim's Progress, for example. This book has tremendous value. It takes these things that are core experiences for the Christian life and turns them into a whimsical, relatable, enjoyable tale.
And I think that's what Bunyan was doing. He was teaching a robust, reformed, Calvinistic theology,
right?
In a story, a road trip,
Right.
And there are some fairly deep things in Pilgrim's Progress, and there are some discussions, particularly on issues of assurance and law and gospel,
Right.
have very robust treatments in Pilgrim's Progress. It's a pity, speaking of Pilgrim's Progress, it was up until a generation or so ago, the best, most printed book in English apart from the Bible.
Right.
That's not true anymore, but I think it. I think it's something that the church should try and redress, and put it that way.
Side note, it was a particular treat to discuss this particular book with Dr. Thomas. After all, Dr. Thomas has a lecture series you can find online entitled Pilgrim's Progress, A Guided Tour. I think I've listened to it about half a dozen times. Anyway, the reality is that theology is not about some boring, intimidating pontification in a dark room. It really is everything. Considering the fact that there is a God and we were created for His glory, a right theology impacts literally every aspect of your whole life. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, with someone like Dr. Thomas, surely he always knew he wanted to be a professional theologian, right?
No, I wasn't raised in a Christian home as such, and church wasn't part of our rhythm. I had a brief brush with church when I was about 13 or so, and then dropped it. But I was converted in my first year at university. And I would say that within probably 6 months to a year, I became convinced that God was calling me into the ministry. And I have to say that my view of ministry then was pretty narrowly defined, in that meant I was going to be a minister of church, a preacher.
For Dr. Thomas, the tug of God on his life led him to formal professional ministry. For you, who knows? But I know one thing: you were created for a purpose. You did not keel over dead once God saved you. No, God made you a new creation so that you can do something for His kingdom in this world. Is theology some important topic that you must learn about? No. Theology is everything.
You know, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And there's a great deal of wisdom in that answer to the first question of the Shorter Catechism. That the closer we live to God and with God and in fellowship with God, the better we'll understand ourselves and the better we'll understand our calling. And whilst there are particular nuances to discovering what our particular call might be, discovering our gifts and talents and so on, I think that maintaining a close communion and fellowship with God on a day-to-day, hour by hour, minute by minute, second by second basis, most of life's issues become clear. They become clear because it'll be clear to us what it is we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. You know, maintaining that daily walk and communion and fellowship with God in Jesus Christ, and knowing the fullness of the Holy Spirit, that's what gives us purpose and meaning and joy, and enjoying, not just enjoying ourselves, but enjoying ourselves being in communion with Him.
There you have it. The very purpose of your life. Thanks for listening. This concludes this particular dispatch from the front lines of the Lord's Army. If you want more information or content, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Apply what you have learned in this episode. Remember, you do not become a great man or woman in Christ without taking action. One easy way you can help spread the gospel right now is by subscribing to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, just by liking us and leaving us a review, you can have a massive impact in how many people we reach. Go out there, take action, join the battle. LordsArmy.org.